It's now my privilege to introduce today's keynote. As Secretary of the U.S. Department of Labor, Alexander Acosta plays a significant role in America's success. The policies his agency sets forth not only impact our workforce and job creators, but also have far-reaching impacts on the economy, employment, healthcare, retirement security, and more. The son of Cuban refugees, Secretary Acosta is a native of Miami and first-generation college graduate, having earned both his undergraduate and law degrees from Harvard University. Following law school, Secretary Acosta worked as a law clerk for Justice Samuel Alito at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He then worked at the law firm of Kirkland Ellis and went on to teach at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia School of Law. Secretary Acosta has served in 3 presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed positions. In 2002, he was appointed to serve as a member of the National Labor Relations Board, where he participated in or authored more than 125 opinions. In 2003, he was appointed Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And from 2005 to 2009, he served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He also recently served as the Dean of the FIU College of Law. Secretary Acosta has twice been named one of the nation's 50 most influential Hispanics by Hispanic Business Magazine. He was also named to the list of 100 most influential individuals in business ethics in 2008. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, U.S. Department of Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta.
So Tony, thank you for the introduction. And let me just say, it's great to be back here in South Florida and in Palm Beach. I had the pleasure of seeing several of my former students. To all in the audience who went to FIU Law, I am incredibly proud to have been your dean, and I'm incredibly proud to hear of all your successes. I still stay in touch with the students, and you really matter. So please stay in touch. It's also great to see so many friends in the audience. It's very heartening, having been U.S. Attorney, to see AUSAs who are now judges, to see individuals who are friends who are now state attorneys. One of the great parts of being a leader at times is seeing those around you succeed. And whenever I come back to Florida, I am amazed at how much so many have done in such little time. The last time I was in Palm Beach County on official business, I was thinking back, I was United States Attorney, and I think I was talking with the county commission. It had just followed a series of prosecutions that involved, I believe, about 3 county commissioners and 2 city commissioners. And I have to say, I just met a colleague who is sitting up here who is now with the Office of Inspector General. I thought those prosecutions were very important, and I thought they were important because they have to do with voter confidence in our system of government. And I'm gratified that Palm Beach County stood up to the challenge and established the office, and I'm glad that individuals are working there now, and so thank you for what you're doing. One of the things that I try to do when I'm in a position is really take a step back and say, what should the priorities be? And what are the root causes of what is happening? And just like here in Palm Beach, we took a step back and we looked at the root causes and addressed them. I'd like to take a step back now and look at some of the root causes and address some of the issues that I think America is currently facing in the labor space. And that has to do with the skills gap. The skills gap is, in essence, the gap between the skills the workplace demands and the skills our educational institutions provide our workforce. Now, before I talk about these, I want to set the stage, and I want to start with some comments about where we are now. The American economy is incredibly strong. It is. We have created, in the last year, plus this month, more than 2 million, almost 2.4 million jobs. Unemployment rate is at a 17-year low. And the Federal Reserve estimates that this year it's going to drop to 3.9%. The stock market has set record high after record high after record high. And you know, when I talk about the stock market, I think that's a very theoretical number. So I like to tell folks to take out their iPhones or go home and check your retirement savings, check your college savings, check your pensions, and ask what has happened. Because it's not a theoretical number. It impacts the lives of everyday Americans. More than 40% increase over the last 13 or so months. All this said, there are areas where we can do better. There are more than 6 million open jobs in the United States right now. And job creators from across the country are saying, we have these open jobs, but we don't have individuals to fill them. And these are good family-sustaining jobs. Nurses, IT support specialists, construction workers, welders, web developers, vital jobs that required skilled individuals. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, why do we have 6 million unfilled jobs? And this is in essence what's called the skills gap. Let me say we are not alone in this. Shortly after I became labor secretary, I attended the G20 Conference of Labor Ministers. Every minister at the G20 conference said that the skills gap was one of their foremost challenges. And it's a symptom, I would argue, of a larger problem that this administration is working to address, and that's the gap between traditional education and workforce education. And that's what I want to talk about today. How we can eliminate this distinction between traditional and workforce education, and how we can use that to reduce the skills gap, to help all those individuals that are looking for jobs acquire the skills demanded by the workplace so they can fill these 6 million open jobs. Now, I want you all to take a step back, if you could, and think about education. Now, think about workforce development. Do you think of those as different? Most people do. And I'd argue that keeping these concepts siloed without any meaningful connection fosters this skills gap. Both traditional education and workforce education share a common goal: to provide Americans the opportunity to enter and succeed in family-sustaining jobs of today and of tomorrow. I just met with students a little bit earlier, and I asked them if they all wanted a job. Every single one raised their hand. And so I think we need to begin by acknowledging that there is a shared goal, and that's to prepare individuals to have the jobs of today and of tomorrow. Now, schools and government have built up walls between workforce education and traditional education. As a government official, as Secretary of Labor, and as a former law dean, I know these barriers well because I saw them. Educational institutions say that the objective of education is to enrich, to expose students to new attitudes, new pursuits. Too often, the academy argues that it is not its role to teach practical skills. The educational establishment regards education as a path to lifelong learning often. Separately, we've been taught that workforce education only serves to develop vocational skills. We're taught that workforce education can be a path to lifelong earning. Yet too often, and wrongly, workforce education is considered the less than path. And this is unfortunate because in any field, lifelong learning and lifelong earning are not mutually exclusive. From Pensacola to Palm Beach, the prevailing wisdom is that vocational programs can't provide long-term family-sustaining jobs among schools. Guidance counselors across the state and our nation are incentivized by the way we measure success at our schools to steer students toward college. And they do so regardless of whether it is the best option for the student. They do so even when students may receive little skills education relevant to their career path of choice. Sometimes they tell students that a 2-year vocational program is limiting, that college is the key to a good job, a career, a life of comfort, that college is the key to success. Yet here in Florida and across the nation, the results of the college system do not bear that advice out. For students in the Florida university system, between 2009 and 2015, the college graduation rate was only 66%. Only 2/3 of students graduated, not in 4 years, but in 6 years. Only 2/3. And only 2/3 of those students found jobs within a year of graduation that paid $25,000 or more. Those are the facts, those are the statistics. You can look them up on the state university system website. And let me say, Florida is among the best university system among the 10 large states. So that is a successful university system. And only 2/3 of 2/3, that's less than half, graduated within 6 years and found a job that pays $25,000 or more. Too often in our nation, students graduate from college with substantial theoretical knowledge, yet little ability to apply this knowledge in the workplace. Too often, other students become disillusioned and do not graduate at all. They say, am I gaining the skills to go out and make a great living? Am I getting a return on my tuition investment? So how did we get there? How did we get here? I'd like to go back to our oldest schools. America's first institutions of higher learning, the Harvards and the Yales, were established as theological seminaries. That was the role model, theological seminaries. Now, as our nation and our economy prospered, our leaders increasingly saw this as a problem. And they increasingly saw that there was a need to provide students with places to both learn and to build the skills that led to earning. And so in 1862, Congress created our nation's land-grant universities. If you look at the law that Congress passed, Congress stressed the need for skills education in addition to doctrine. The law called for instruction in the agriculture and mechanical arts. I'm quoting here, without excluding other scientific and classical studies. So the original purpose of the land-grant universities was to teach the practical skills that led to jobs without excluding other scientific and classical studies. Yet as time went by, these universities strove to become like the famed universities that preceded the 1862 Act. More than 100 years later, we've moved away from the original purpose of these land-grant institutions. Now, the federal government spends $114 billion plus annually on workforce development and traditional education. Of this $114 billion, a mere 6% goes to non-college job preparation programs. Only 6 cents on the dollar. And this does not include the billions spent by students on tuition each and every day. Traditional four-year colleges and universities receive the lion's share of these billions, often despite resisting skills education. So let me be clear. The federal government spends more than $100 billion each year on workforce education, and most of these funds go to institutions that resist practical workforce education. So how do we ensure that we can better serve young Americans? I'd argue that we need to show students that there are many paths to success. We need to show them that lifelong learning and lifelong earning are not mutually exclusive. Over the last 30 years, the skills demanded by the workplace have changed as quickly as the types of jobs found in our economy. Our system of education, however, has not kept pace. An inpatient nurse needs to treat patients and manage the discharge process. A welder has to transform science into practical art. An IT systems administrator has to build and rearrange and fix and must keep learning to keep pace with ever-changing threats. The jobs of today and careers of tomorrow demand both practical skill and intellectual curiosity at the same time. The jobs and careers of today and tomorrow require what I will call demand-driven education. Demand-driven education teaches the skills demanded by the modern workplace by merging traditional classroom education with workforce education. Demand-driven education encourages students to pursue scholarship and at the same time acquire practical on-the-job experience. It allows students to earn while they learn. Now, let me ask you all this. Let me ask a show of hands. Any doctors, nurses, or teachers in this room? Raise your hands. Okay. Each of you, there are probably a few more in the room, but each of you in your education required practical skills. Could you imagine being a teacher without having to go through a student teaching experience? A doctor without having done rounds in a hospital or learning how to suture? A nurse without having met any patients during your education? Each of you had to learn to treat and to interact with patients, to stand before classrooms, to practice your profession quite literally as an apprentice. One of the things that we're trying to do at the Department of Labor is to encourage all industries to adopt this teaching method. This apprenticeship method works and is successful and is used in many parts of the world. In Switzerland, roughly half of the bankers are educated in colleges and universities, and the other half are educated by the businesses themselves. They start their first day on the job in an apprenticeship program. And they are as respected as those that went through the college system. The CEO of UBS is one example of an individual that started as an apprentice day one at UBS. And I say this to make clear that our system is not the only system. And our decision to say that there is a plan A and then a plan B is not the only approach. Colleges and universities have an obligation to engage in practical teaching opportunities. Now, I'm willing to bet that many here participated in semesters abroad or have children that have participated in semesters abroad. Let me ask you this question. If colleges and universities can have a semester abroad, why can't they have a semester in residence? If a history major can spend a semester in London, why can't a criminal justice major spend a semester at a police academy? Why can't a law student spend a semester at a law firm? All for credit, all as part of a program of study. Practical experience can be written in as capstone courses. The last semester that many students tend to take, a little less seriously than we might think, could be a serious practical work experience that leads to a job. Wouldn't a student who spends a semester at a police academy be more likely to stay in school and finish their degree if he or she knows that a semester or a year later they have a job waiting for them? And wouldn't it be great if they can spend that semester at that police academy seeing if that is the kind of profession they want to have? Wouldn't that student be more likely to start at a higher wage? The answer is likely yes. In fact, those students that go through apprenticeship programs graduate and make about $10,000 more than those that do not. And for that matter, aren't there programs available where individuals might be able to start as police officers and attend college at night, earning money and supporting a family while they're learning. My point is this: higher education tends to follow a one-size-fits-all approach. Yet in our increasingly entrepreneurial, individualized workforce, young men and women increasingly determine their own paths. For some, this may be the traditional four-year degree. I am not diminishing that in any way. My point is that for others, a college education is a means to a job, and practical workplace experience is a strong incentive to complete their education. And for many, a certificate program, a course in welding, an instruction in coding, a certificate in mechanics, or other educational experiences might be the preferred course. These individuals may want a job today that pays very good wages. These jobs, on average, pay better wages than the typical college graduate receives. And then they may want to reserve the opportunity to attend school while working or defer their education until later. Now, I think it's unfortunate that many students are not aware of all their options. The existing system starts grooming students to get on the college track in middle school. Students hear 7 years of talking points that position college as option A, and anything other than that as lifelong struggle. Plumbers, medical sonographers, and entrepreneurs often don't follow the traditional educational track. Yet these individuals arrive at family-sustaining jobs often faster and certainly with less debt. And they should know their educational options. If we all acknowledge that traditional education and workforce education have a shared goal of preparing more Americans for family-sustaining jobs and careers, we can empower these young Americans with the tools needed to close the skills gap. And what will happen? Graduation rates will rise. They will reflect a healthy mix of technical 2-year and 4/6-year schools. Student loan debt will fall with expanded educational options, and more individuals will have a greater ability to find a family-sustaining job. Students won't feel paying for a costly degree is unfair, particularly if they view that degree as not having prepared them for the modern workplace. And students should simply know their options for getting a sustainable job and building a fulfilling career. We shouldn't present it as option A or lifelong struggle. We should present it as there are many paths available to you, and you should choose. Now, let me say that as I was preparing to come here, I was encouraged that the Palm Beach School District actually is doing just that. And I'm going to read directly from the Palm Beach School District strategic plan. This is the exact quote. Postgraduate success in our modern world is no longer solely defined as attending a college or university. We need to adapt our thinking in order to provide our students opportunities to pursue industry certifications, attend colleges or universities, or enlist in the military. We'll be putting our students in a position not only to succeed, but to excel in their transition to a global workforce. And so I had the opportunity to meet the students from Lake Worth Community High School, and I asked the seniors what they were doing, and every single one had a career path in mind, and every single one knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they were on paths to family-sustaining jobs. And I want to ask the seniors to stand up for a second, because you're all amazing. Rarely have I seen seniors that know what they want to do. Rarely have I gone to a school and all the seniors know exactly what they want to do, and I think that is a testament to your school and your principal, Elvis Epps. Mr. Epps, are you here? Well, Mr. Epps, this is a quote from him. If we cannot reach them, we cannot teach them. And he's clearly reached them because it was an impressive group. Your school's making every effort to reach out to you and to teach you that there are many paths to lifelong earning and learning, and I think that is wonderful. I want to conclude by sort of appealing to you in a way that I hope will linger. I'd ask each of you to think of a college or university that you know well. Just think of a college or university you know well. It could be Florida State, it could be University of Florida, it could be FAU, or any other college or university in your home state. Now, I want you to think of how many students are enrolled in that college. How many of you know how many students are enrolled in that college that you're thinking about? Okay, keep your hands up. I want to see them high. Keep your hands up. Now, how many of you with their hands up know what the graduation rate is from that school? If not, lower your hands. I see 3 hands left, maybe 4 or 5. Now, of those hands that are still up, how many of you know what the employment rate is among the students that graduate? Okay, I see the 3 hands up still. I may assume that you're working at one of those schools. And I'm clearly right. The vast majority of those in this room likely know the enrollment rate at whatever college you're thinking about. But you didn't know the graduation rate or the employment rate. And I think that's really important. Because what's the right measure of success? For those that run a business, ask yourselves, do you measure the success of a business by how many people walk through the door? Or do you measure the success of a business by whether individuals find value in your product? Or by whether they find such value in your product that they come back a second time? Yet in the educational establishment, we think of success based on how many students walk in the door, based on how much money is raised, based on how much money is saved in the endowment. And we don't stop to ask, how many students succeed? I think that's a really key point. We want a mechanical engineer going to night school, taking courses in management, so he or she can become a small business owner and run their business. We want a lawyer pursuing an LLM degree to prosecute human rights at night. We want a welder who has a passion for sculpture to be able to take classes and turn their career into a passion. We want individuals to pursue lifelong learning, both for intellectual purposes and because the workplace is changing and individuals need to learn and adapt along with the changing workplace. But we also need to recognize that education is a great equalizer and takes many forms: higher education, vocational education, apprenticeship programs, workforce education. Education and hard work allow individuals to chart their own paths and steer their own destinies. And saying that any one form is better than the other is not what America's about, and it is a disservice to those individuals that choose one path or a second path or a third path. Because if you have a family-sustaining job and you are in your career of choice, that is what the goal should be, and any judgment should stop right there. I believe in this deeply because I've seen it in my own life and the life of my friends, colleagues, and most significantly, students. And so I ask that each of you as individuals, as business owners, as job creators, as parents, as grandparents, talk about this and help break down this barrier, because we're doing a disservice to young Americans by not informing them of all their options or by judging them based on their career of choice. Thank you very much.
If you have questions for Secretary Acosta, please hold your cards in the air and our volunteers will come by to pick them up. Secretary Acosta, the questions we ask our speakers come directly from our audience. This is our opportunity as citizen leaders to hear news and information directly from the source in an unfiltered way. To kick off our Q&A, we have questions from Lake Worth High School, 2 of them. Take it away, please.
Okay. Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So I'm Tassine from Lake Worth High School.
Welcome.
I'd like to ask you a question. As a father, what advice do you give your own children on how to be successful in the workforce?
So thank you for the question. My older daughter's in 2nd grade and my younger daughter's in kindergarten. And my older daughter had to do a project she picked a state out of the hat and had to do a project on that state and talk about famous people in that state. And in the process, we came across the biography of someone from that state. And the title of the biography is "Can't is Not an Option." Something that I think I knew instinctively, but really realized as a parent, is the importance of building confidence and instilling a drive to make effort and work is incredibly important. And sort of saying can't is not an option, I think, is empowering, because so many times folks hit a roadblock and they'll stop. And the people that succeed are those that go forward and say, can't is not an option, I'm going to keep going. And so as dean at FIU, I saw this when sometimes folks wouldn't get their job of choice. But you know what? Those that kept going in the 2nd or 3rd try typically did. And I think that for students is one of the best lessons that parents can give you. Can't is not an option. Hard work pays off. Thank you.
The next student, please.
Hello, my name is Cecilia. I'm in 11th grade, and my question is, as someone who has been a leader at both the state and national level, what do you believe are Florida's greatest strengths when it comes to a job, creation, and employment?
So Florida is an incredibly dynamic state. You know, Florida is now 3rd in the nation in terms of population, and one of the amazing things about Florida, so I'm from Miami, and as U.S. Attorney, I was U.S. Attorney from basically Key West up to several counties north of here, up to just south of Vero Beach. Every county is different. Every county had a different economy. Every county had a different mix. And as you go up the state, things change even more. And so in a lot of ways, Florida is a microcosm of the nation, because from Pensacola to Miami, you have so many different cities with so many different industries and cultures. I think one area where Florida could use improvement is in attracting the large corporations. And there are a number of states that really roll out the red carpet for the large corporations. And I wish Florida would do that a little bit more, because those large corporations do change communities. They invest in community groups. They bring very high-paying jobs into the community. But by and large, Florida is a dynamic economy. Florida is an exciting economy. Florida's unemployment rate is incredibly low. And as I said before, Florida is actually, among the large states, Florida ranks #2 in its educational system, which I think is a testament to Florida, despite what I said about the system as a whole. Thank you.
So I will tell you that by far, your meeting has generated the most questions of the year.
Sorry.
So I just want to let you know that there are a lot of very interesting and exciting questions that are coming from our audience.
So we're all here till 3, right?
Economic growth comes from increasing productivity and population growth. Our current immigration system is inefficient. what should our immigration system look like to maximize economic growth?
So, it's interesting the way the question is set up, because the way that question is set up almost guarantees the answer, right? And so if you want a immigration system to maximize economic growth, you want an immigration system that takes into account the skills that individuals have when they're coming in to this nation. So let me sort of take a step back and maybe take on the harder question, which wasn't asked, but I'll take it on. And that's this. So I was in Switzerland a few days ago, actually more than a few days ago, but I was in Switzerland and I had an opportunity to listen to the president's remarks. And he said something that I think is important to echo. America first is not America alone. He also said every leader has to put their nation first. And so here's a way of laying this out and laying it out as it relates to immigration. All of us have families. All of us care about the community. But we take care of our families first, right? We're a national family. Sometimes we disagree like families do, but and sometimes vigorously, but we're still a national family. And we need to take care of our national family and then the global family. And so as we look at this immigration system and as we look at fixes, and we need fixes, and it's unfortunate that the fixes become so politicized, because if you could depoliticize it a little bit, I'm willing to bet that if folks could sort of go into a room without any public attention and talk about it, you could probably find common ground. One of the things that we need to ask is, how can our immigration system foster the long-run growth of our nation? And that's what I think is at the heart of this debate.
Okay.
I'm not.
Well,
Yeah.
we had some questions that were a follow-up on that one. As a son of Cuban immigrants and a Republican, do you think the administration and the party has created a welcoming message, particularly to Hispanic immigrants?
So one of the really interesting things is, let me come at it this way. I was at the State of the Union, and it struck me. My parents didn't go to college. They got married in high school. They had me before my mom was 20. And I was at the second row of the State of the Union. And that's not about me. That is about this nation. And so I do think this nation is a welcoming nation. I think that rather than focus on solutions and try to get solutions out, we are log-jammed. And that logjam is causing a lot of strife. And we need, as a nation, to find a solution. And so I'm hopeful. I read an article this morning that maybe the immigration debate would be postponed by a year. And I hope that it's not, because we need to find an answer and a solution to immigration. It has been discussed not just now, but in the prior presidency and in the presidency before. And we keep punting on this issue. And as a nation, we need to talk about it, and we need to address it, and we need to do what makes sense for our American family. But then we need to solve it, and we need to move on.
Excellent. So, after your confirmation, your first day in the job, what surprised you about this job?
So the Department of Labor is a very large department. And there are two parts to the Department of Labor that I think are significant and often overlooked. One is this workforce development issue that I've talked about. And so much of what we need to focus on is really the intersection between labor and education. Because if you can solve that, imagine what we can do as a nation, right? We have about 6 million individuals that are unemployed. We have about 6 million open jobs. It's overly simplistic to say if you solve the skills gap, everyone would have a job, because there are always a certain number of people that are looking for a different job or a better job. But we really are failing young Americans in how we prepare them. And I am surprised at how siloed workforce development is from the educational system. And I think because it is siloed, schools aren't talking as much to businesses, and businesses aren't relying as much on schools. And I think that's unfortunate. So I've traveled to many cities, and I've seen some programs that are amazing. I'm thinking of one program in Reno where a community college was teaching HVAC repair. And it was really interesting because I asked all the fancy folks to leave the room and talk directly with the students. And I asked all the administrators from the community college and the deans and all that, please just let me talk with the students. And there was a young man who had been homeless who said that he was pretty close to death, that he'd been using drugs, and now he had his own apartment, and he had a job that was making about $12 or $13 an hour. And he was really proud. And he loved the program he was in, and he was looking forward to graduating and getting a permanent job that paid really, really well. And so why aren't we doing more of that? Why are we focusing all our energies in just one part of education? So I was talking with the vice chancellor of a state education system, and I raised this with him. And he said, Mr. Secretary, you're absolutely right. We're focusing far too much on the upper level courses, the IBs and the APs, and we need to focus more on SAT prep and ACT prep. And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, I think you just missed my point. Because the vast majority of students don't get their jobs based on their SAT score. And so I really gained a passion for this topic because I think if we can fix this bias long term, we're going to fix so many issues in this nation by providing job opportunities for so many individuals that can really benefit from practical skills.
When you graduated law school, you went to clerk for Justice Alito. He came here to speak. What did you learn working with somebody like that, and what impressed you about him?
Well, there are two things that I should point out, and I'm going to talk about the first quickly, then move to the second, because I've already touched on the first. I learned so much from him about how to be a lawyer. And this sort of goes back to the practical versus the theoretical. And one of the issues in the legal profession, it used to be that students graduated law school and then they worked for the great judges and the great partners, and they sort of learned at the right or left hand of these individuals. But more and more, judges are getting big dockets and having to hire career clerks. And the big firms want experienced attorneys. And so we've got this gap in how are we teaching our young people? And so I'm indebted to him for having taught me so much about lawyering and writing. I remember getting drafts back that he had completely rewritten and then looking at how he rewrote them and learning quite a bit about writing. But I also learned a lot about humility. Irrespective of whether you agree with his judicial philosophy or not, you should know that Justice Alito is an incredibly humble individual. He flew down for my swearing-in ceremony as U.S. Attorney. And I remember friends of mine that were flying down, and they were very embarrassed because they were up in first class, and they got on the plane, And then they see the justice walk right by them and go right back into coach, right? And they're like, can we give up your seat? And he's like, no, 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 it's fine, right? But that says something about who he is. And I think that's so important in government service, because these jobs are not about you, but they're about the chair that you occupy. And someone occupied it before you, and someone will occupy it after you. And you've got to always remember that it's a trust, and you try to do the right thing. And at some point, someone else will take over that trust. And it's important to be grounded. And in that sense, he's been a great, great model of a public servant.
A few weeks ago, we had Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein speak to us about the rule of law. He also referred to you as a friend. He brought you up in the meeting. As a former U.S. attorney, how do you feel about the recent attacks from the right against Mr. Rosenstein and Mr. Mueller?
So Rod and I served together as United States attorneys, and he was an outstanding U.S. attorney. There are a number of U.S. attorneys that I served with that are back in the administration. I think we're in the middle of difficult times. I think that individuals will all do what they believe is appropriate. And I think as a Secretary of Labor, I need to leave the Justice Department issues to the Justice Department to resolve.
So we'll swing back to your wheelhouse. Could you please comment on the relationship between the decline of union membership and the stagnation of wage growth?
So we could have a long discussion about whether there's a relationship or not. Let me sort of try to unpack the question. Once a month, we issue the unemployment numbers. And if you look at those unemployment numbers, every press release, but for the one that came out this last Friday, in every press release, I have said that we need to see increased wages. Last Friday morning, I changed the statement. And I said, because wages had increased 2.9%. And I noted that this may be the start of a trend, because wage growth was 2.3% in November, then 2.5% over a 12-year period in December. 2.5, 2.7, and then 2.9%. And I think that's a really important issue. Wages have stagnated. We can talk about, is that due to unionism? Perhaps, and the decline of unionism. Is that due to other factors in the economy? Perhaps. Let me sort of throw out other factors, because I think rarely is one factor the sole factor for any societal trend. If you look at labor force participation, it's in the upper 62%. It's incredibly low. There was a time when we had about 5 workers for every retiree. We now have about 2.5 workers for every retiree. And so why are folks not participating in the labor force? As unemployment rate goes down, some folks are reentering the labor force, but not as many as we think. And so one of the reasons is if wages go up, you've got folks that are available in the labor force, but that also may start to end. There's a second issue out there in the labor force that I think is incredibly important, and that has to do with opioids. And let me give you some statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study. They asked, did you take a painkiller yesterday? When they do the national unemployment surveys or the national job surveys. 44% of adult males not in the labor force said yes. Not last month, not last year, but yesterday. So a professor at Princeton, I believe he used to work for the Obama administration, did a follow-up study. And I say that to just show this is a bipartisan comment. he did a follow-up study, and he said, was it an opioid? And the figure fell from about 44% to about 31%. Think about that. 31% of adult men who are not working answered yes. That's a real problem, right? And so the question is, what's driving that? And I think it's a little bit more complicated. Some people say the medical profession prescribes it far too often, and it may be. I was talking to a hospital administrator that said that they put much stricter rules around it, and all of a sudden the reviews for physicians went down, but they told the physicians, don't worry, we know that your customer reviews are going to go down, your patient reviews, and that's okay because you're doing the right thing. And I think hospital administrators like that deserve a lot of credit. But to some extent, if someone loses a job and they don't see a clear path, that's not a good thing for their life. And there might be a greater tendency to become hooked on drugs. And so I say this because I think there are a lot of societal issues that are driving folks to come out of the labor force that is creating slack to some extent. That is also relevant to wage growth. But I do think as the economy improves, as we address the skills gap, it is my hope that wage growth accelerates, because I think that is a good thing.
The president often talks about being business friendly. Can you talk to us about maybe some of the guidance that you provide to employers to help them with their work?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think it's about respecting the rule of law. And so the law is the law. And when it comes to OSHA and wage and hour and other areas, I look at our job as law enforcement, and we're going to follow the law. Now, when we do that, I think it's important that we not play gotcha. And I'll give you an example, and the example has to do with opinion letters. So for decades, the Department of Labor had issued opinion letters. Someone has an issue, they write the Department of Labor, we don't understand what this law means. And the Department of Labor responds, given your facts and given this is how you should be applying this law. Now that was stopped in the prior administration. And the reason it was stopped is it was viewed as, if we tell you what you're supposed to do, then we may not be able to enforce the law against you. It was called a, quote, get out of jail free card. And so here's my view. If you're a good actor and you just want to know what the law says, we should tell you, because prevention is a much better tool than prosecution. If you're a bad actor and you do wrong, you will be prosecuted. So when I was U.S. Attorney, I started a program to pursue gangs. And the gang violence had gone up. There are a number of gangs that were sort of killing. What they would do is they would use high caliber weapons that went through one wall, another wall, and innocents would be shot and killed. And it was really bad. And so we started a program to prosecute gang members for being felons in possession, for being a felon with a firearm. And I was very proud of that because we became one of the top U.S. attorney's offices when it comes to felon in possession charges. But I always said, when I met with groups like this, here's the problem. Back then, in Miami, of 100 kids that entered high school, only 78 would go on to 10th grade. So how many of you out there, show of hands, would hire someone that dropped out at 10th grade? And that's what groups always did, not a single hand. For every prosecution that we did, there was probably a dozen kids that were going out onto the street. And so prevention was a much better tool than prosecution. And I said that as the chief prosecutor. And so I would say that in this context as well, we will enforce OSHA and wage and hour and all the other workplace laws vigorously. But if we can work with businesses to prevent the violations in the first place, we are going to help a lot more people. And that's our philosophy.
The Me Too movement has highlighted the fact that sexual harassment is still a problem in our economy. What is the Labor Department doing to tackle this issue?
Well, within the Labor Department, like so many other departments, we've certainly reinvigorated our training programs and our internal guidance and policies and procedures. You know, I think more generally, we need to look, and businesses need to look at their HR policies and not just assume that they're okay, but they need to review them. They need to make sure that they've got mechanisms in place for individuals to report. And when those reports are made, they need to take them seriously, and they need to investigate them early. Because these are the kinds of things that if you investigate it early, you can prevent a lot greater harm.
So our last question has to do with retirement security. The previous administration created something called the fiduciary law that says that advisors should put the client's best interest ahead of theirs. What do we have? Do we have a problem with that law? Is there something that's we're going to do with that?
Right. So it's actually the fiduciary rule, and it was one of the areas under the jurisdiction of the Labor Department is ERISA. And the fiduciary rule had two parts. One, it said that individuals should act in their client's best interest, that individuals in giving advice for retirement plans should act in their client's best interest. And then the second part it provided remedies that eliminated arbitration, that made arbitration illegal, and that set up all sorts of class action liability that lawyers could bring to enforce that. We took a close look at it. We decided that the standard for now would remain in place. So the best interest standard is the rule that is now in place and is being enforced by the Department of Labor. At the same time, we took a look at several of those remedies, and we have concerns that the remedies will foreclose companies from feeling comfortable giving advice to many individuals, because the legal risk of giving the advice, and then if the advice was not on point, being sued is so high. And so we are taking a look at those remedies, and we've postponed the remedies for 18 months while we look at them. I've asked the SEC to take a look at this so that perhaps the SEC approach can come into greater alignment with the Department of Labor approach. In the prior rule, the SEC did not participate fully. So you had the Department of Labor regulating the securities industry and the SEC regulating the securities industry separately and differently. And one of the things that I've asked the SEC to look at is whether there can be greater alignment between the Department of Labor and the SEC's approach to regulation of the securities industry. And so this is something that we're working on right now. I should also say, I wrote an editorial or an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal to lay all this out so that the public was aware of the thought process and of the path going forward. And you know, my experience was that was a good thing, because when we can communicate directly to the public, it allows for individuals to go back and read and reread and not just look at a little snippet or a little headline. And so that's a method that I've come to like.
With the Q&A complete, we'd like to thank Secretary Acosta for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Please stay tuned for an announcement about our upcoming events very soon. Thank you for coming today.